So, with great pleasure that I have an opportunity to introduce Megan Schnitker to you. She is a member of the, I'm going to come pretty close here, Sikangu. Sikangu, am I pretty close? Oh, thank you. Lakota woman from the Rosebud Indian Reservation in South Dakota. Megan started a family business called Lakota Made in her kitchen at home some years ago. And then she opened a retail location in Mankato where she sells her traditional herbal products and medicines. And then just about, 6-8 months ago, she held a ribbon cutting ceremony at Lakota Made, and now has 6 employees strong, and has moved into a much larger location and an accommodation for a very fast-growing business. Megan learned to make traditional items from her grandmother and elders in her community. She listened to their stories about plants, herbs, and native history, and started taking these stories into different products. As a traditional herbalist, Megan uses foraged plants to craft shampoos, bars, salves, tinctures, lip balms, and colognes. Almost all of the items in her store are used by her family. So now we know a little bit about Megan. Let us not delay anymore and give her a warm welcome and turn it over to Megan. Thank you, Megan, for being here.
I greet you with a good heart and handshake, my relatives. It doesn't matter what culture you come from, we're all human and we're all related in some way. My name is Many War Bonnets, woman given to me by my great-grandfather when I was about 9 years old. He told me the story of how my name came to be. He said many, many generations ago, we had a women's warrior society, and there was not very many women in that society because most of our women were homemakers and mothers. And he said that this woman, she had so many eagle feathers because she had so many accomplishments that she had enough feathers to have many war bonnets. And he said that she would ride into battle, and she was of the Red Sash Society. So she wore a red sash around her waist, and she had a large spear. And she would ride into battle, and she would choose a spot, and she would stab her spear into her sash into the ground, and she would stay there the entire battle. And he said that she had not only warrior achievements, but she had many achievements within her community by helping her people. And he said that when she finally decided to become a mom later in life, he said that she kept on with her achievements by adopting orphans and other children from the tribe. And not just other children from our tribe, but our lost settlers that had our children. She had many children of many different races. And so that is where my name comes from. And he says she lived in probably the 1500s to 1600s. And so this name has been passed down for many generations. And that is how our family continues one of many traditions with our family. My daughter Avon here, who just turned 10, she received her name about 3 years ago. Avon, do you remember your name? What is it? Uya Itancha Uya, which is woman who leads them. And so her name also comes from women of leadership. And if you have read about me or heard about me before, I have 7 daughters. My husband had 2 daughters, and we have 5 daughters together. And so that makes 7. Our oldest will be 14 here in a couple weeks. Our youngest just turned 8 months a couple weeks ago. And so we have quite the children. And so my grandfather, who still guides me spiritually, has said that our family comes from a lot of men. And so he says for us to have lots of girls, he says, it's the first time in 300 years that a chief bull bear had a firstborn daughter, and that would be me. And so he says, otherwise bull bears were known for having sons. And so he said for my brothers to step up and start with some grandchildren. And so that's just a little bit of our family history. And We are from Rosebud community. My dad comes from Pine Ridge community. My mom is of Rosebud. And our light-skinned and green eyes comes from my grandfather on my mother's side. My grandfather, excuse me. He came over on a boat when he was 2 years old from Norway. And so, yes, we're very mixed. My father's mom, who's still alive, her great-grandfather was French because her last name is Marshall. And it used to be Marchalet, but now it's Marshall. As names kind of change over the years with, we lose things in translation over the years. And so they don't know how many generations that our family married a fur trapper, but it was quite a while ago. We lost a lot of history on both sides of our family due to boarding schools and then generational trauma. And so a lot of our history is gone, but a lot of it is still there. And so a lot of our history is passed down through oral tradition, through storytelling. And that's how I learned a lot through growing up, by listening to my elders, not just from my family, but from my community. I was lucky that my father's side held on to traditions and stories very strong, because my mother's side wasn't so lucky. They didn't have that. They didn't have that history and that language. And so I don't know a lot about my mom's family history, other than who is related to who. My father's side is very traditional. We still have my grandpa Richard, who is a first language speaker. He is also one of the last few medicine men, or he calls himself a nacha. And so he says that he was given this right to practice our spiritual ways as a young man. And so he never attended school. He's 92, still drives, which is kind of scary sometimes. Grandpa, that's not a road, is often said. But he says he likes to joke too. We have a lot of really good indigenous humor, and he says, the spirits guide me. And I say, well, Grandpa, I don't know how much guidance they can give you when you have this many speeding tickets. And so my grandpa, he keeps a lot of our history alive, and every time we see him, we sit down and we joke and remember the ones that have gone on, and then he tells me lots of history. He's like, me and my brothers. And so he says, I'm not going to be around forever, so I have to tell you everything that I know right now. And so, we sit there and we eat cake and coffee, lots of coffee. And he sits there.
That's the Norwegian in you.
Yes. So is the butter and sugar. But my grandpa, he loves his cake and his coffee, so as long as I'm feeding him cake and coffee, he's game to talk for hours. And so that we just had a family celebration. My dad's Aunt Marva, she turned 74 recently, and the whole time we were supposed to be there, celebrating and having a good time, and my grandpa's like, nope, we got to sit down and we have to tell stories right now. And I was like, okay, where's the coffee pot? And so a lot of the things that he instills on us is old ways. And he says a lot of it is lost, but a lot of it is still here. And so the biggest thing that he puts on us is that he says a lot of things aren't relevant anymore because of the way that we live, but you still need to live you still need to understand these ways. And so he says, a long time ago, all of us used to be connected to nature. It doesn't matter what culture you come from. We all worshipped nature in some way. And so we all lived in harmony with nature. We all respected everything that lived and everything that we don't think is living. He said, even the rocks have a spirit. He said, the rocks tell us where the medicine's going to be. And he says, the rocks come to our sweat or our nipi or our church. And so the rocks help us pray to our Creator. And so he says, not just the rocks tell us how to live, but the plants tell us how to live. He says they have a spirit and they have a mind and they have feelings too. And so when he says, when we say medakyo yasin, not just all my relatives, not just my relatives sitting here, but my relatives outside that are living, that are older than us, that keep the history. And he says, if you stand there and you listen, you reconnect with nature, you'll hear him talk to you. And he says, when you go outside and you pray for medicine, you're praying for health, they'll talk to you. And they'll bring you your medicine. And so he says, the medicine that you need the most will be in your yard. And so he says, when you spray chemicals out there, or you're mowing, he's like, you're disrespecting those lives that are trying to come and help you. And he says that when we lived a long time ago, that was our food. And our food was our first medicine. And we were very healthy people then. And he says, now today everyone's got a big gut and everybody's obese and diabetic. And he says, that's because we lost our connection. And he says, we go to the grocery store and we rely on food handouts and we rely on people giving us food. And we forgot how to take care of ourselves and take care of nature. And we forgot how to recognize our relatives that are edible and are medicinal. And so he was joking the other day. He says, yeah, he's like, I'm so old now that I rely on you to get all my medicine. He's like, you got younger legs. And he says, it's really important that we pass down these traditions, because he's like, as I tell you these stories, he's like, I'm getting old now, and he's like, I'm forgetting. And so he's like, you have to remember these stories. And so he's like, I know people say that we shouldn't record our stories, that we shouldn't write them down. He's like, but we have to. He's like, because as we say these stories and we repeat these stories, sometimes parts of it gets lost. And so the biggest part of us sharing our stories is making sure it's recorded, or making sure that someone's there to listen, or that there's more people there. And so I've never discriminated against teaching anyone and everyone that wants to listen. And so there's people that get angry with me and they're like, well, you're teaching non-natives, and that's okay, because we're all native to somewhere. It doesn't matter where we come from, we're all native to somewhere. And us being part Norwegian, my daughter's being part German, we can't discriminate that. Lakota is not just a people, it's a lifestyle. And so a long time ago, we adopted people that would be lost and wandering in the prairie. We adopted them and we taught them our ways. And then settlers would come and rescue them, but then they'd come right back. And so we had a lot of different people that were light-skinned or that were really dark. And so that was not just true for Lakota people, but it was from all indigenous people, because we cherished each other's lives, whether we were of the same tribe or not. And we cherished our relatives that grew outside, that lived outside. And we took care of each other, because if we took care of nature, it would take care of us. And so that's kind of the lifestyle that we live at home, is that we take care of nature. When we're outside and foraging, we don't let our kids just go running through the prairie. Like, you got to be careful where you step. You don't know who you're going to step on. It could be a relative trying to greet you. And so we used to laugh and tease Avon when she was little. She would take her shoes off and she would fill her shoes full of rocks and dirt and grass. And she would come to us with roly-polies and worms. And she called them Sarah's and Allen's. Sarah's were the worms and Allen's were the roly-polies. And those were her best friends. And so she was very careful with her relatives. And so we had quite a few Sarahs, but to her they were all the same Sarah. And so we kept telling her that she had to put Sarah back in the garden. She had to take Sarah back to her home. Because if you bring Sarah inside, that's not her natural environment, and she's not going to live. Same with the roly-polies. And so we teach our children, you can't put it in a jar and expect it to live its life. It needs to be where it's from. And so, except for my house plants, those all got to be inside. And so we need to respect nature. We don't put butterflies in jars and hope that they live. We don't capture our relatives and bring them inside, because that's not where their environment is. And so teaching our children to respect nature, to watch where you step. When we were in Texas the other day we came back to winter. It was 85 degrees when we left, and I miss summer. I had it for 4 days this week. But we were outside and we were in Texas and we were on this hiking trail. And I always observe other people, I like to people watch. I'm not very a social person, but I like to people watch. And so we were hiking on this trail, and I was watching this family, and they were ahead of us. They were quite a few ways in front of us. And I liked how this family was observing nature, not touching it, not taking it, not hurting it, but they were observing. And the father was looking, they were speaking a different language, so I'm not sure what they were saying. But he was pointing at different things on the ground, and he was telling his children to be careful. And I was like, oh my gosh, bravo, thank you. Because not a lot of parents do that, they'll let their kids run wild in nature, which is okay sometimes, let them reconnect with nature, but sometimes that's kind of dangerous, because it doesn't matter where you're from. There's our relatives that don't want to be bothered. And so, especially in Texas, they have scorpions and snakes, and up here, up north, we also have snakes that don't like to be bothered and don't like to be touched. Back home, we used to tease the badgers. When I was little, we didn't know how dangerous that was. When we were 5, 6, 7 years old, me and my cousins running around, and we were out in the cattle in the pasture where we weren't supposed to be, which was quite often. Because we were what we call feral children today. My grandma would shoo us outside as soon as the sun came up, and we weren't allowed back in the house until the sun came down. Because if we came back, then we had to do chores. And so that's not something us kids were into, and so we would just disappear on the farm. And so we were out where the cows were, and we knew we weren't supposed to be out there because of this rattlesnakes. But we found a big hole in the side of the hill, and we decided to throw stuff in it. Being kids, let's see what's in there. Luckily, my brother wasn't with us because he was the younger one, and he was the one we liked to make go into random holes. You can fit in there, go see what's in there. And so we were throwing things in there, and then this thing started growling. And we're like, well, let's throw a bigger rock in there and see what happens. And so we kept doing this, and then all of a sudden this thing got really mad. And it started running out, and we're like, that's not a coyote. Coyotes will just run the other way, but this was a badger. And we were like, oh my God, I don't know what that is. It looks like a skunk, but it looks like a bear. And so we booked it down the hill as fast as we could, and this thing chased us all the way to probably about 1.5 miles back to the farmyard. That was the fastest the three of us have ever run in our little childhood lives. And we told our uncle what was going on. And we got the BB gun to the butt because we were really stupid. We deserved that. Because that could have ended in someone losing a limb, someone getting hurt really bad, a trip to the hospital, which was over an hour away. We grew out in the sticks, and our nearest neighbor was 5 miles away. The nearest town was at least a half hour away, and that was just a small grocery store. So if anybody actually got hurt, it was closer to an hour before you got there, and that was going over the speed limit. And so another time we were running around on the farm because we just lose our shoes. They quit buying us shoes after a while. We were running around down by the barn, the newly put up barn, and my cousin Ashley stepped on a nail. And it went all the way through her foot. And we went up to the house, and we told Grandpa, the old Norwegian, and he was just like upset. But he was like, now you're gonna have to wait for your dad to come back, and he's gonna be mad because it's gonna be a while, and that nail's gonna be in your foot for quite a while. And because Grandpa couldn't drive at that point, he was blind, and so my grandma was upset too. But she also couldn't drive. So we were stuck on the farm with no one to take us to the hospital to take it out. And the whole time, my cousin Ashley is losing her mind, just crying, because my grandpa's like, when you go to the hospital, they're going to give you a shot with a needle this big. And he is just telling her all this awful stuff. And so after that incident, because we were about 5 and 6 when that happened, my Uncle Neil said, well, if you're going to be stupid, you better be tough. And so he decided to start showing us plants that we could use as a snack, and plants that we could use to heal. And so he's like, well, since you guys are wandering around without shoes on, here's some plantain that'll help you stop bleeding, and here's some yarrow that'll also help keep it clean. And then he said, well, since you're out here, you might as well learn some snacks. And so because if we went back to the house for any reason, we'd get in trouble. And so we started learning our different snacks and learned some medicinals. And when I met my great-grandma when I was about 8 to 16, she started teaching us the traditional uses of all these plants, because my mom's side of the family didn't have that. And so every time we went to my dad's side of the family, I went and I listened, even though it was really hard being 8, 9, 10 years old, because you know everything at that age. But I listened because I was the oldest. And being the oldest, I had to be in charge, and I had to be the best behaved, and I had to be the role model for my younger brothers, as hard as that was. And so I would listen to my great-grandma because I knew my time with her was short, because she was really old. She was 102, 103 when she passed on. Wow. And she was very stubborn, my grandma Eva. And she didn't like going to the hospital, and she didn't like going to the doctors. And she said, my medicine's outside. And so every time I went and saw her, I'd have to go pick things with her, and I'd have to listen to her. And we had a massive language barrier because I didn't grow up hearing Lakota. I didn't grow up hearing our language. And when she spoke, I had to listen very carefully. And I slowly started to pick things up. And I started to understand because she would use a certain kind of sign language where I would understand her, and she would point, and she would be very animated with her hands. And she would draw things with her hands in the air, and then I'd start to figure out what she was talking about. And then my grandpa, my dad's dad, would come around and he'd be like, she doesn't understand you. And my grandma would just like shoo him off and get out of here, we got this, you know. And grandpa would come around and he'd try and he'd be like, well, she's told you this 3 times, and what she said was she needs this kind of bowl. And I'd be like, oh, okay, I got it. And so we'd go get her favorite bowl, which was a grass weaved basket. And I don't know where she got that basket. She told me, but I didn't understand her. But my grandpa told me that she made it a long time ago, and she made it out of the grasses that grow out in the prairie, and she braided it. And so we used that basket, and we went and get her medicine. And she told me stories all this time, and I wish I understood the language because those stories are now gone. But after she passed on, my great-grandpa Royal would come down, and he understood English. And so he would tell me stories in English. And when he gave me my name, he said, now you have a big name to live up to. And so he's like, I'm a teacher. I teach Lakota language back on our reservation. And he says, I teach the ones that are lost so that they come back. And so he says, now that I'm giving you this name, he says, you need to do the same. You need to do this for not just yourself, but for your future generations. He's like, I'm not going to be here forever. And he's like, I'm not going to be able to be a teacher for much longer. And so he says, I need to rely on you to help learn these ways so that you can teach other people. And after he passed on, then it was up to my grandpa to teach me. And I listened to him, and I'd go sit and I'd drink coffee with him. We'd go visit for long periods of time. And while he was a first language speaker, English was kind of hard for him, but we got along pretty well. And he'd always get so excited. And he'd be like, Takoja! And he'd be like, I got coffee. And I'm like, all right. So drinking day-old coffee, that bitter coffee, it eventually killed my gallbladder, and I don't have it anymore. But that's kind of my favorite pastime, is smelling coffee. And after he passed on, I started going to our tribal university, Santa Igleshka University. And they have a lot of online resources. So if you're computer savvy, you can Google Santa Igleshka University Lakota Studies Department, and they have lots of my teachers online who are gone now. But they have tons of courses and free YouTube videos. And I went to that university, and I went there for a few years, not necessarily for a degree, but for the resources. I went there for the elders, because the Lakota Studies Department was comprised of Albert Whitehat, Russell Eaglebear, and quite a few others that were historians and storytellers. And they weren't medicine men, but they were storytellers, which was really important. And so they kept a lot of the history and the culture, and a lot of them didn't go to boarding school, and so they were able to keep a lot more intact. And so when I sat there, again, a part of our culture is coffee. Sitting there and making sure that they had cigarettes and coffee. And so they would sit there and they would tell me stories for hours and hours and hours, and they'd be like, oh, we missed class. And it's okay, because I got to sit there and listen. Their classmates sat there for 2 hours waiting for them, but I was thoroughly entertained. And my uncle Steve Tamayo, who's won a few national awards for his work in different museums for preserving our artifacts that are in different museums, what we call our relatives. And so he just got back from Germany, actually. He was in a museum over in Berlin, helping restore some of our artifacts that were out there, and identifying what they were used for, and what tribe they came from. And so he and I got to listen to the Lakota Studies professors for quite a few years, and we'd sit there and joke and laugh and listen to language and history and culture. And I definitely missed those times over there. And recently we went back for a funeral early last spring, and Russell Eagle Bear was there, and he gave me a big hug, and he says, Takoja, it's been a long time. And he's like, you need to come back so we have more stories to tell. And I was like, yes, I will come back. And so he's like, there's not many of our younger ones that like to just sit and feed us coffee and listen to us BS for 2-3 hours. And so I was like, I miss it. I wish you need to come visit. And he's like, absolutely, I'll come visit you. And so that was just last spring I saw him. And so he was one of the many elders that I listened to. I also had a lot of unchis or grandmas that I listened to as well. They're all gone now. But they have some of their stories on the YouTube too. But they all had one purpose, was to keep teaching, to keep talking, and to reach out to anyone who would listen. And so that was a big part of my goals as a younger adult, was to grab those things and to keep handing them down to anyone who would listen. Because it's the best way to keep our stories alive. And the other part that they wanted to make sure that they got through was to reconnect with nature, to go outside, to go sit in the grass, or to go sit outside in the snow. And that was something that they all said that was really important. You can listen to our stories all you want, but if you don't understand the basis of our culture, which is nature, he said that then you're not going to understand any part of it. If you don't respect what grows outside, if you don't respect the trees and the earth that's outside, you'll never understand our culture. He's like, you can go to all the ceremonies you want, but if you're still walking around with your shoes on outside, he's like, you're not going to hear it. You're not going to feel it. And he said, or they all used to say, that that was a big part of their disapproval of younger generations learning, is that they just wanted to hear the stories, but they didn't want to go out there, and they didn't want to hear the stories from nature itself. And so he said, long time ago, everything we had came from nature. Our needles to sew up our dresses, our thread to sew each other up with stitches. And he said, that was our food, our medicine, that was everything that we had. And he says, that's why you can't find a lot of our older stuff, is because it went back to nature. And he says, that's why we didn't have cemeteries, is because when we passed on, he's like, we didn't put chemicals in our bodies and get put in a casket and then a cement tomb and then put in the ground. He said, we wrapped each other in plants and buffalo robes, and we put ourselves up in trees. And he says, we would let nature take us. And he says, a year or two later, our family would come back and clean up the area, and they'd return the rest of us to nature. And he says, that is the way that they wanted to go. And that's what a few of them did. And so he says, everything that we had was nature, and that we were part of nature. We're not separate from nature. We can't live without the oxygen. Well, what makes the oxygen? It's the plants and the trees. We can't live without water. And we were discussing a few weeks ago what God was. Because it doesn't matter what culture is. As they say, God's everywhere. It doesn't matter what culture you come from. And so one of the things that we talked about is that what every living thing needs to live is water. And so one of the things that we protect most as Indigenous people is our water. And so we were like, well, water is God. Because without it, nothing lives. You have to have it. And there's plants that don't even need oxygen, so God can't be oxygen. because there's plants deep in the ocean that are completely deprived of oxygen, as well as animals. But everything needs water. The rocks, the soil, the land, the trees, the plants, people have to have water. And so when we talk about returning to nature, it's not just the plants, the animals, and the trees, it's about respecting the water. Because all of our ceremonies are based with water, somehow, some way. It starts with water, clean water. And so we protect our waterways. And so we protect what goes into the water, what comes out of the water. We respect the water because it gives us life and it can take it away. Not just the plants that can give us life, but plants can also take it away if you're not careful. And so when we learn to forage, when we learn to take care of our plant relatives, we respect that because plants have many lookalikes, so do mushrooms. And it can be dangerous. And I didn't know what dysentery was until the Oregon Trail game a long time ago. See, when I tell that joke to younger generations, they have no idea what I'm talking about. But I'm like, I was on the Oregon Trail, and I died of dysentery, so I know what that is. But so when you tell younger generations what dysentery is, they're like, oh, well, why didn't you say that? I did. It's a word. And so that was a real thing. It's a real thing that can happen. Luckily today we have some good Western medicine that can stop that. However, it's not always the best thing to have to sit on your toilet for 3-4 days. And so being careful when we learn our plant relatives is to respect them because they can hurt you. They don't intend to, but that's just the consequence of not being careful and not being sure of what you're doing. And so like we say when we go mushroom hunting, all mushrooms are edible, sometimes just once. And so another funny Avon story is that a few years ago, we went mushroom hunting, and we didn't bring anything with us other than a couple bottles of water and our mushroom bags. And we were out there and we were mushroom hunting, and we were gathering some honey mushrooms, and they were looking really good. And we were in this area that was just, it was the day after it rained, so all the mushrooms were there. And all of a sudden, Avon comes up and she's licking her hands, and she's got this orange dust on her hands that looks like Cheetos. And we're like, oh my God, where were you? And she was like 4 at the time. And she was like, oh, I was over there. She had eaten a poisonous dust that had grown on this mushroom. And so we knew exactly what it was. And so my husband grabbed her and I grabbed the other kids and we ran to the car. That was the fastest we ever carried 4 children in our lives. When we got her to the hospital, we told him what it was. It's a dust that happens, it grows into it. It's a fungus that grows, and sometimes when it lands on the right mushroom, it turns poisonous and it turns orange, and it turns that mushroom into something else. And so when you touch it or ingest it, luckily you had to ingest a lot of it in order to get hurt, but we went to the emergency room, and they looked her over and they kept her for 24 hours, and they watched her and nothing happened, luckily. But it's not something to mess around with, because you have no idea what's going to happen and how you're going to react. Because while we're all human, none of us react the same to plants. None of us react the same to mushrooms. And so sometimes we have to be extra careful. And so luckily Avon no longer licks her hands when we're playing with mushrooms. But it's always a good reminder at how fragile things can be. It takes just a second of turning your back for a little one to eat something or to touch something that they shouldn't. And so when we go out foraging or we go out hiking or go out camping or anything like that, we remind our children that nature is there for us, but it's also there sometimes against us if we're not careful. And so our girls, most of them can identify at least some basics. They can identify some first aids. They can identify some snacks. And the biggest part of it is they know what not to touch. Because if you don't know what it is, don't touch it. And if you have no idea what it is, don't eat it. Because, as my grandpa said, if you're going to be stupid, you got to be strong. And so we remind our children every time we go out in nature. And so my children often go back to South Dakota for the summer. They go out there and they spend time with my parents because my mom has a nonprofit that does cultural immersion camps. And so for 4 days every other week in the summer, they have culture camps. And so they like to go with the foraging crews because they like to remind the other kids that don't have that experience to not touch things and to be careful where you step because you could be stepping on a relative. And then the other part that we teach with foraging is not to take more than you need because you're taking someone else's home. You're taking someone else's food. You're taking someone else's medicine because it's very medicinal for us. And so it is so for the rest of the nature outside. And so we make sure that we forage respectfully and ethically. We also watch that our plant relatives have everything that they need and that we don't over-harvest, that we don't take too much. The other part of that is that if you take too much, you're not going to use it and it goes to waste. We don't want any part of our plants to go to waste. So we're very careful with that. We use every single part of the plant, sometimes a few times. And we also, and whatever is left after we're done making things goes into the compost, so that goes back into nature and that's reused. And so we have a pretty big garden in the back of our house, not just for us, but we kind of community garden with a lot of our friends. And so we have a bigger space in Mankato in our backyard, and so we kind of share crop. So our friends in Mankato, because food can get expensive, and so a part of us is not just foraging for the wild things, but growing the typical things like the celery and the carrots and potatoes, because we have a large family to feed, and so food is expensive, and we want to be able to save our money not just for our clothes and our fun things, but we also want to save our money for life, because life happens every day. It takes just a second for it to change, and so. Having 7 children, we have a frequent flyer card at the ER. We get it stamped every once in a while. And when Avon was a baby, she was born without an immune system. And so we spent the first 2 years of her life in and out of hospitals, which was really hard. And so not sure if she was going to make it. But we have her. And that was a big wake-up call to how fragile life is. And so when we did 2+ years of hospitals, she wasn't getting any better. And so my grandpa said, well, you tried that way, it's not working. And so he came to our house and he did ceremony for her. And he used our medicines. And she's here. And she's better and she's healthy. And she's, good God, is she sassy. And so, ever since Richard did ceremony for her, she hasn't had to stay in a hospital. And he gave her traditional medicines. And he's prayed for her every day since then. And it's been amazing to watch because you're not sure. You want to believe doctors and you want to believe that they have your best interest, but sometimes they don't. She had a team of 13 doctors and not one of them could make her better. She saw specialists every other month for her first 2 years and they couldn't figure out what was wrong with her. They could just tell me that you can't do this, you can't do that. She might not live to 10, but she's 10. And so, but my grandpa always said that you just have to believe and you have to have faith in whatever you believe in. And he said he didn't discriminate with people that believed in the Christian ways or the pagan ways. And he says, because you have faith in something, and that's strong enough. And so he says, when we go back to nature, that strengthens our faith. And so he says, the medicines that we're going to give her, he's like, it's not going to be traditional. It's not going to be something that she takes. It's going to be giving her something that's much stronger, which is your love. And so she's here today because of Grandpa Richard. And she's here to teach us something because she's the one that follows me absolutely everywhere. And so she's also the one that can identify the most plants. She works in our store. And she's come to every single vendor event that Lakota Made has ever been at in the last 4 years. And so being thankful for the gifts that we are given and being able to give them, my children, the gift of nature every single day. And so we get excited when there's new plants. We get super excited for spring. Well, winter has a lot to teach us. It's not just death and mourning, but nature has a lot of medicine too. Winter has a lot of our stronger medicines with the chaga mushroom that grows up north on the birchwood trees. And then the bark soup was just terrible. There's quite a few different medicines that grow and in the winter, or that are only harvested in winter. And so, nature in winter isn't just about death and being sad. Winter is actually a beautiful thing because it teaches us patience, and it teaches us how to be stronger. And our winter medicines are our strongest medicines. And so there's a lot of them that we harvest to keep throughout the year. Our summer medicines are more for healing and for growth. And so each season that we have has a purpose, and it has a medicine, and it has a food for us. And so in the winter we relied a lot on our buffalo meat, and we relied a lot on our elk meat. And then in the summer we relied on all of those first plants that came up, because those were our immune system boosters. Those were our vitamin-packed foods. And so as those things, as we lost touch with a lot of those things, and now we're sick, and now we're depressed. And if you read research on how dirt affects us, go outside without your shoes on and touch the dirt. It gives you those enzymes and those minerals to help out with depression and sadness. And going outside, and the sun is our biggest vitamin giver, our vitamin D, and that affects us. Being inside, as warm or as AC as that can feel, we need to be outside. And that's our biggest thing as being humans, is that recognizing that nature was given to us so that we can live with it and not against it. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have time for questions, comments. So are there any questions?
What are some of the healthy snack plants?
There's purslane, there's plantain, there's yarrow, there's nettle. Nettle is actually a superfood, stinging nettle. So be careful when you harvest it. When you go to harvest it, reach down, pluck out, and then as soon as hot water or warm water touches it, then the needles are done. And you can eat it, you can make tea with it, you can saute it. It's actually really good. Actually, what isn't really good with butter and salt. But it's really good with butter and salt. And instead of like eating spinach from the store, we use nettle because it tastes better. And it's a lot better for you. Whether it's cooked or put in a tea or a tincture or a salve or a soap, it's really good for you. Those are some of our first snacks, especially in the spring. We also have dead nettle, which is stronger than regular stinging nettle, but it only comes up in the spring. And it's purple, and it's about this big, and that's when you want to harvest it, is in the spring. A lot of our snacks are pretty easy finds, especially like, as long as it's, what is that? Oh, wood sorrel. That's the one that they like because it's lemony. And that's packed with vitamin C. And so you can't, whatever your body doesn't need, you poop and pee it out. Especially when it comes to like our little snacks, our spring snacks. They're there for you to pick and to eat. They're also there to boost your immune system because it's been so dark outside for our 20 months of winter. Moved to Minnesota, and I swear it's like 20 months of winter. But it's not as cold as South Dakota, I'll say that. So there's just, yes.
Do you have a lot of land to do all this picking, or do you ask for permission to harvest these things on private land?
Yep, I actually don't own any land in Minnesota. I own a lot of land in South Dakota. But there's an abundance of people that are like, can you come pick my tree line? Public lands, we can go pick there. There's Congress passed something about 7-8 years ago where as long as you're an enrolled tribal member, you can go harvest any state or federal park. We do that as well. And we also get a lot of private landowners that are like, you know, come pick my pasture, come pick my tree line. I have no idea what this is. You can have it if you can use it. We get a lot of people that come in the store and offer up their land and their resources. So we never have a shortage. Yes, ma'am.
From food products from your store, do you include like recipes or how to use?
Yep, on our website, our labels are only so big, but a lot of our resources are on our website. It teaches you what each plant is and what it does in that product and how to use it. We're in the process of recording me for different recipes and how-tos, plant classes and stuff like that. That's been in the works. It's just a time.
So how many hours do you have to gather per month, per week?
It depends upon what we're after, but each product probably has about 12 hours into one jar of salve. But from harvesting to preserving to making, and plus labeling, that's about 12 hours into one jar of salve. Soap is a lot longer. Lip balms are pretty easy, but each product takes a significant amount of time. And so when we're harvesting, we usually do volunteer groups, which we haven't advertised before because we usually get too many people. And so, because while we're harvesting, you get to learn how to identify the plant, how to harvest it, and how to take care of it. And so there's a big demand for that. Never thought that I would have a problem where I'd have to tell people, no, we're full. But this year we're going to kind of do it a little bit different, and we'll have online signups. And so you can schedule what time you're going to come and all that other stuff. And we have a bus this year, so it'll be a little bit easier. But plants from harvesting to product, our average time is about 12 hours. Yeah. So, and if you do it with volunteer groups, sometimes you add about 5-6 hours. But yeah, our average time with our experienced harvesters is about 12 hours.
Do you do powwows?
We do. We were supposed to go to Morris, Minnesota powwow, but we triple booked ourselves. So usually we go to Morris. Last year we were there, and then we already put them on the calendar for next year, so we can't triple book ourselves.
When is Morris?
Morris is next weekend.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Yep. Yep, that's coming up. But we do a lot of powwows, a lot of vendor events. We get invited to a lot of different healing expos. And then my Uncle Steve signs us up for a lot of stuff too. And so we're in Omaha quite a bit this year. And then we have enough staff to where we can do multiple events this summer. So we'll be all over the place.
Do your kids dance?
Yes, yep, they all do. And so they all just got new beaded humpahs from their grandma. She just spent her last bit of winter beading 5 pairs of moccasins. So, and she just got done yesterday. Yes, ma'am.
Could she tell us about her dress that she has on?
Do you want to talk about your ribbon dress? Our ribbon skirts. There's there's a good debate whether those are traditional or not,
Yeah.
because we didn't have the fabric and the ribbon. But as we started trading with people, women would design quite a few different ribbon skirts, and so each tribe had a different version of ribbon skirts. And today our artists kind of mimic those, but it's something that we often wear that kind of, honors that time in our lives. A lot of our art mimics things that we used to wear. And so, like, this is a dentilium necklace. This is something that dentilium you can't get in the upper Midwest, but it was a shell that grows in the ocean that we used to trade for, and this was our money a long time ago. So the more elk teeth and dentilium art your women wore, the richer you were. And so we have a lot of no, that's parfleche. So we have a lot of things that our artists still do today that honors a lot of things from the past. And so ribbon skirts is one of them. Avon's wearing a pretty simple one. They get pretty bougie from there. If you don't know what bougie means, it's really eccentric. And so she just got that at the Prairie Island powwow we were at last month. And so when we go to powwows, we like to go shopping from all the other vendors. And so she got that from a lady that made that skirt, and then she had a shirt that went with it. And then the hoodie she's wearing, even stand up, is also another indigenous artist that we got from Pierre, South Dakota, from the Indian Horse Relays. And so we went there, which if you've never seen the Indian Horse Relays, it's something to see. That's as fast as they go, as many wrecks as happen. It's kind of crazy, but it's a good time. And it also honors the way that we used to have a relationship with the horse, and how not just our horsemanship, but the way that we would have a relationship with the horses. And so the Indian Horse Relays is quite the thing. Because it is horse relays, and they are ponies that were just broke or not broke. And our riders are very young, in the teens and early 20s. And you're supposed to ride this horse around this track as fast as you can, get to the next, jump off the first horse, jump onto the next horse, and that's kind of how you go. And there's some epic wrecks. There's some crazy things that happen. The ambulances do stay busy. But it is something to watch, because if you're an adrenaline junkie, it's really fun to watch. But yeah, that's where we got her shirt, or her sweatshirt. And so all of our clothes, this is from a Dakota artist that she's pretty fun. She makes a lot of things. Our geometric patterns are something our Lakota women used to have. And then more of our the ledger art that's on Avon's sweater is more of the men's style art that we used to have a long time ago. And so our artists today still use a lot of our history and our culture from a long time ago in more of contemporary designs. And so that's where a lot of our stuff comes from. Yes?
I'm just wondering if, in addition to supporting Native-owned businesses like Lakota Made, are there some good ways that you'd like us to know about that that non-Native Minnesotans can support the efforts of Indigenous communities to preserve and revive, traditional foodways and traditional medicinal ways? Is there a way that we can help support that work?
Learning. Learning and supporting our businesses is the biggest part. Being here is a big effort, because you learn different resources and things like that. But yeah, there's a lot of nonprofits that are about cultural revitalization. Lakota Made does that as well. And so with our products, we have a lot of Lakota words, a lot of Lakota history that go along with our products and things that we do. And then we also have our customers have an option, our online customers, to add medicine for the elders to their cart. And what we do every year is we take all that money that is given to us for that, and we turn it into salves and teas and honeys and medicine, and we take them back to Rosebud Reservation and it's handed out to the elders. And we just did that event at the beginning of March with a Stichanguk coalition over there. And so they had a big event where they fed the elders, and we handed out medicine bags. And so there's quite a few different events and different programs that do things. Lakota Youth Development in South Dakota, they're a local nonprofit. Like I said, that's my mom's nonprofit. They do cultural immersion camps, and they rely on monetary donations. They also do a lot of grant work, but unfortunately there's not a lot of grants that really fit exactly what they're doing, and so they rely heavily on private donations to do what they're doing. And then there's lots of other nonprofits. I do highlight a lot of them on our Lakota Made Facebook page. And so I like to share as much as possible because otherwise that resource isn't available. And so we have a large following, and so I like to make sure that our supporters are able to reach out and learn from different programs.
Are you moving to South Dakota?
No. I lived there. What we're doing, our 5-year goal with Lakota Made is to move our production back out to the reservation because my reservation that we're from has an unemployment rate of pretty close to 98%. And so we would like to help out as much as possible by providing enterprise and jobs. You can change a lot of lives with money. That's the system that we live in, that's the world that we live in. Until I can pay my light bills and my mortgage with hopes and dreams, we have to make sure that our relatives are also taken care of. And so the goal within the next 5 years is to move our production back out there. Not back out there, out there. And so to keep our retail spot in Mankato, our main retail spot, but to keep, to move production out there that would not only be economic development, but also culture revitalization, because not a lot of people my age or from where I'm from have the plant knowledge. They weren't lucky enough to get that from their elders. And so reteaching our plants and our medicine back to our people and making sure that we can hire, the idea is to ramp up our production so that we could hire at least 20 to 30 different people. Because right now everything is made by 3 people, which is a lot, but not. And so if we could move our production back out there, we would be able to not only save, because Minnesota is the land of 10,000 taxes, and the reservation isn't, we would be able to make sure that our employees out there are given a living wage by starting out at $20 an hour, because right now the average job out there, it starts at $7 an hour, and that's not a livable wage. And so, especially for people that have to drive significant distances to get their basic needs, clothes, diapers, formula, things like that. And so there's a lot of church missions out there that our people rely on, but those were unfortunately shut down by the tribe for shady business practices, but that was a huge resource for our people. And so now our people have to travel at least an hour to the nearest grocery store and dollar store to get their diapers and things like that. And so being able to help out the reservation a little bit is one of our major goals.
Could you speak to the difference between supporting Indigenous artists and taking that on ourselves? What's the word I'm trying to think of?
Appropriation?
Yeah.
So cultural appreciation is buying art from the actual artist. Appropriation is taking that as your own and selling it yourself.
Okay.
That's the difference. And so the biggest thing that we support is cultural appreciation. So all the artists that I buy from sell to everyone because they want everyone to be able to appreciate our culture and the beautiful things that come from our art. Not just our art, but our wares and things like that, because everyone has to eat. And so as long as you're buying from an indigenous artist and not something that's made in China, that's a cultural appreciation. So the artists that I support, they sell to everyone. And they are open about their culture, they're open about their history, and their artwork. And that's the biggest part. Because this isn't just for me. Anyone can buy this and anyone can wear that, and I would appreciate that they did. I'd be like, oh, you know her too? That's awesome. You know, I share those artists quite frequently on our social medias because it is important. Because there's many, not just these designers, but there's many designers that will sell you beadwork, quill work, any type of art, and it's appreciation. And so appropriation is when you take a culture or a ceremony and you sell it yourself. And so that's the difference.
Okay, well, thank you, Meg.